Welcome to Dev Interrupted. I'm your host, Andrew Zigler.
And I'm your host, Ben Lloyd Pearson.
Oh, Ben, we were just chatting about how much has happened this week. Where do we even start?
Yeah, it's just, for at least now, this will be known as the week where everything AI was announced, I guess.
I
uh,
suppose.
yeah, a lot of big events, some incumbents, some newer players to the market. Let's just start with the event that I think had the biggest news this week, and that is the Google I/O event. So tell our audience a little bit about what happened there.
Yeah, so there was the very recent Google I/O event where Google released a lot of new updates around products and features. And to no surprise, AI was heavily featured on the bill of new things that come out from our friends at Google. We're going to break it down maybe into some of the different categories of things that came out of Google I/O because what I loved about their approach to this is understanding that AI and its implications are impacting a lot of different industries and fields. So there was something for
Yeah.
everyone at Google AI. Some of the stuff that stood out to me personally was around like the new headset that came out. I thought was really fascinating. That even had onboard access to Gemini, and it had a really cool demo about translating a conversation in real time. Not the first time we've seen, glasses and accessories from Google, but it was actually really cool to see that on display.
Yeah. Also, not the first time we've seen this concept of flattening communication, like human communication using AI. So that's pretty neat too.
What stood out to you?
Yeah. So I mean, there's quite a few announcements. I mean, obviously they announced their own agentic coding assistant called Jules. I haven't really had time to look into it, but I mean, obviously everyone that wants to be in this game has got to have some sort of agentic coding assistant. But I mean, as you mentioned, this event touched on a lot of professions, even outside of software development. Like the thing that's really been going viral is their new VO3 AI model for generating videos. So just really, I mean, we're really entering a new era of video just based on what I've seen so far. And then there's also like an AI video editor, which was pretty crazy. So
Yes, the Flow AI video editor was very cool, allowing creatives to give their video generation a lot more direction and even
yeah,
input, and it helps them level up their workflows. It goes back to actually what we talked about maybe several episodes back, Ben, about there needs to be tooling that allows creatives to iterate in the same way software
exactly.
developers can, and this is Google really hitting home on that. So I'm excited to see what folks make with it.
Yeah, exactly. Creatives are feeling disrupted by AI. It's really nice to finally see a focus on tools that help them versus like just replace their capabilities. It's Google. Who knows where these products are actually going to go? They may abandon them in a year or 2 years or something. But it is just very interesting to see what's coming out of this. But I think the real point to take away from this is that incumbency is still a very powerful force in software technology. In fact, to the point where I think even companies that are being disrupted by AI, like you think about how much search, like Google search has been disrupted by AI, because they have so much data, so much powerful network effect, they actually have quite a bit of capability to not just survive in this world, but also thrive because they have the data to give these models context. They can train data on the stuff. Like we've been seeing going around social like comments about how companies like Stack Overflow are losing a lot of their traffic. But the reality is they aren't losing a lot. They aren't really losing their value. Like there's still a lot of value in the data set that Stack Overflow has from decades at this point, or more than a decade, of being this centralized knowledge source for developers, and that is extremely useful for training AI models. So yeah, it's everyone's focused on all the hot startups that are emerging in AI, but the incumbents might be a little bit slower to get around to it. But I think Google's really showing us that once they get there, it can be pretty powerful, particularly considering just how much Google stumbled in the early days of AI. Like this is a very different, this is a very different experience this time, just based on what I'm seeing.
There's definitely a lot at play and a lot in motion. And a really cool thing that we're actually going to get an understanding of is I sat down recently with one of the developer relations engineers at Google DeepMind, who gave us a glimpse at how these kinds of products are built and shipped and educated to folks at scale. So I'm really excited for that upcoming guest because it's tied to all these great things that came from Google I/O, and we're going to
Yeah.
continue to explore some of the new toys from them. So moving on though, there's been a lot more than just Google I/O happening in the last week, Ben.
Yeah.
What else? What else really caught your eye?
Yeah, I mean, Microsoft is also running their annual event. It's called Build. Similar to Google, tons and tons of product announcements. I think the biggest one that obviously that I'm paying attention to, but I think most people are paying attention to is GitHub Copilot coming out with their own agentic coding capability,
Yep.
effectively bringing it to like parity with Cursor and Windsurf and now Google's Jules, I guess. I'm really withholding judgment on this one for now. We'll have to see how it actually gets rolled out with teams. But what were you seeing from this event?
Yeah, so an interesting point that you made there about it coming more into parity with Cursor and Windsurf. Really, what I see is this is a tool that goes head to head with that Jules agentic coding assistant that we saw from Google. And the reason for that is these workflows and these tools, they work in the cloud, they work on platforms and services. And it's being able to trigger and use GitHub Copilot to solve issues and merge PRs and write brand new code all on the GitHub platform instead of on your local IDE. And that's kind of the same thing that Jules is doing, operating in virtual machines on your Google Cloud platform. So you're kind of seeing this level of orchestration in the cloud of these agentic tools. I'm really intrigued to see how it evolves and how teams are able to actually use it, because this is us arriving at that opportunity that we kind of all talk about all the time of like, oh, well, how much time could you save if you had like a whole bunch of developers working around the clock on your code at all times, right? This is these large incumbents attempt to explore that market for the first time.
Yeah, I said I'm withholding judgment, but I definitely believe this is a step in the right direction for Copilot, and it's the direction that everyone is moving.
Yeah.
I do want to call out because there was a particularly interesting situation around this that kind of looks bad for Microsoft, but I also want to just call out some behavior that I think is unwarranted. But
Ooh, call us
one of
out.
the teams, yeah, so one of the teams that works on the .NET runtime decided, like after this event, it looks to me like they just decided, hey, we want to try out this new capability that our parent company, or the company we work for, released, and they deployed it onto their repo. And this is an open source repo, so anyone can go and take a look at what it was doing. But I mean, it failed just like hilariously bad, to the point where it's almost like a perfect example of how like unstructured AI adoption can just like kind of blow up in your face. But this repo has like 70 some checks that run on it, which is pretty. I mean, that's pretty crazy to me. Like, for first of all, maybe a part of this could be like they could optimize some of the CI services that they have running. But regardless, all of the checks failed for these PRs that Copilot generated. And in the comment thread, you can see the developers like trying to coax it into like addressing the fact that every single one of the checks failed, and it makes changes very diligently, but none of them actually resolve like any of the failing checks, and they just continue to fail. So it's kind of this hilarious story, but what wasn't so funny is this actually went viral and a lot of attention got drawn to it. And there's even some people that showed up into the pull request comment section to like, just like denigrate the development team and make them feel bad for doing this. Like, that's not cool. Like, especially when they're like open source developers, but like, these are probably just developers that wanted to try out some cool new technology. And yeah, it didn't go the way they expected it to, but sometimes that's just life. And then you adjust and you try to do it better next time and not make the same mistakes. But if you're somebody who's out there, like going out into an open source repo and telling a developer that they're bad or they're because they made certain decisions, like you're the jerk, not the developer.
Yeah. It's a good thing to call out, and I completely agree with you, Ben. And there's a certain level of empathy that, I have for these developers that are in this position. And I think it's a position that many of us sometimes feel like we're in. You're under a lot of pressure, and you want to try out new things. And ultimately, when you're working in open source, you're working on an open stage where folks can come and contribute because that's the beauty of open source is we can all build together, but we can only do that if we're collaborative and we're friendly and nice, right? It's okay to disagree or to have your opinions on new tools that folks are adopting, but to take that behavior into a PR, it doesn't look good on anybody. And ultimately, they're just trying to, ship good software, just like the rest of us.
Yeah. But if I'm not mistaken, don't we have isn't it possible that we have a guest from GitHub coming up that maybe can help shed some light on how things are going with Copilot?
It's not only possible, it is happening. Dev Interrupted is sitting down with a guest from the GitHub team at Microsoft that's going to explore with us some of these synchronous, asynchronous, emerging workflows folks are seeing with agentic tools. We're going to understand the impact of GitHub Copilot. So it's going to be a really great episode. So we're covering Google I/O, we're covering Microsoft Build, we're covering everything in between. You don't want to miss these upcoming chats. They're going to be really insightful.
Yeah, yeah. So that gets the incumbents out of the way. Let's talk about a younger company that maybe didn't make as big a waves this week, but still made some waves.
Oh, wow. Are you talking about, certain incumbent Anthropic? Because I would certainly say that they're no small company. Maybe they're no
Yeah, that's
Google, they're
true.
no Microsoft, but, our friends at Anthropic also had a pretty awesome week on the demo and release front. While their splash wasn't a huge corporate event, because they're obviously not operating on that same kind of scale, they did have a small, invite application only, event called Code with Claude. That was a group of industry leaders, professionals, founders talking about the new releases coming from Anthropic, and among them is Claude Opus 4, excuse me, which emerges with new capabilities in the agentic coding space, being one of the best code writers by the benchmarks that they released at that event, and really this was a feature on how tools like Anthropic's Claude are combining with other incumbents to provide a better model, right? This is already GA on Amazon Bedrock. This is something that you can toggle and use with your GitHub Copilot agentic workflows we just talked about. They're providing that strong coding model that other teams and other large enterprises are building on top of.
First of all, I love to see it. Like, I love Claude. Anthropic is doing some really great work with it. Like, I use Claude almost weekly, almost daily at this point, actually. So I always love to just see these incremental improvements coming out because I feel like every time this happens, like my life gets a little bit better. Um, but I think what we should really take away from this and from all the stories we have this week is that this stuff is very rapidly shifting. And I keep saying this to the point where I feel like I'm just being overly redundant, but it also feels like it's accelerating too. Like the pace of change within the AI space is getting faster at a faster rate. And because of that, I think it's very risky right now to tie yourself too strongly to a single AI solution at this point. Like, Andrew, I think you can attest to this. Like, as a part of our team, like a lot of our processes, like we're keeping our prompts very separate from the workflows, separate from the project management.
Yep.
And that way we get a lot more granular control over every level of it. So when a new model comes out or when a new workflow capability opens up, it's really easy for us to experiment and to test new things and to migrate to the latest and greatest. So, I think really what our listeners need to be taking away from and taking back to their engineering teams is that now is the time to experiment with a lot of this and, just don't get too tied into a single product or a single ecosystem right now because the potential for whatever you choose to be disrupted is so high. Like the thing that works for your problems today may not work in 3 months from now or may not be the best solution 3 months from now. So the more flexibility you have to adapt, like the better off you're going to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So before we go, this is our producer Adam obligated us to have at least one story that's not about AI. So
Uh, oh
yeah,
yeah. So
just real
are
quick.
you saying that we're going to do our non AI happy hour moment here just to
Yeah.
round things out? Just because everything that happened in the last week, gosh, so many huge AI related announcements.
Yeah.
So this is you burning the sage.
Yeah. So long before AI ever existed, or at least AI as we think of it today existed, it lived this programming language called Java, which has been
Mhm.
around for a long time. It was foundational to me learning computer science. It turned 30 recently, which is
Wow.
really cool. We'll share a really interesting article in the show notes for anyone who's like just sick of all the AI news and wants something that's not about it. Go learn about the history of Java. It's a great language, great to learn about.
I love that Java is turning 30. Java was my first programming language. And some of the Java's core identity is being able to write code that can be anywhere and all sorts of different
Yeah,
devices. And I think that's really appealing for developers who want to have a really broad impact, right? Which we all want to do. We want to ship software that's used by the world. So Java, an original candle for me. And as I kind of went towards that mission, really cool to see it reach 30. I know it's going to reach 40, 50, 60, and beyond because this is a language that's going to be sticking around.
yeah. So Andrew, tell us about our guest today.
Oh, yes. So in just a moment, we're bringing Matt Greenwood, the Chief Innovation Officer at Two Sigma. And we're talking about ancient history and future potential and everything in between when it comes to innovating at scale. So stick around. Hey, everyone. Today's guest has spent over 20 years shaping one of the most innovative financial firms in the world. We're joined by Matt Greenwood, who's the Chief Innovation Officer at Two Sigma. And I've been doing this show for a little while now, but today's episode is rather special to me because it's not every day that I get someone on the pod who studied ancient history and classical languages like myself. So between Matt and me, we could probably cover like 3,000 years in this conversation, and we kind of will to an extent because today's conversation is all about innovation culture, how you build it to last, and what it can mean for you. But first, I want to have a little fun. Matt, like a true classical scholar, he gave me some homework. So, kicking things off, I wanted to turn it over to you about your question you had for me about my classical background.
In doing my homework here, I also like to read the bio, understand who I'm talking to, and I noted that you studied classics. Uh,
Yes.
Rare. I think I tell people I'm classically trained, and maybe I should say I was classically beaten. That was a different time. We went to school, it's a little bit more austere. And so it's rare that I get to see someone who's actually, done Greek and Latin and the classics. And so my question for you was, which of the Odyssey translations most resonated with you or you found most interesting?
I love this question because the Odyssey, like all classical texts, there's a million ways you can read them. There's a bunch of different translations for those that don't know. The classical languages, they follow really strict rhyming schemes, and the meaning that you can gain out of every line is so deep just based upon how long you hold even just a syllable. So, what this means is when you take that ancient language and you turn it into something like English, you can lose a lot of nuance. So, my personal favorite translation is probably Fagel's translation, just because it's a little more fun to read. It's a little faster, and he does take some of those really weird Greek idioms, because trust me, there's a lot of them, and makes them something that you understand in English. But what do you think, Matt? What tickles your fancy?
I have been, I really love Wilson's translation. I think
Oh yeah,
that was, and it's relatively new, so I had to kind of come back to it. But I had a child who was studying classic civilization, so I got to read it again. She does an amazing job of kind of bringing it current in ways that are missing in kind of Latimore or Pope or any of the other
yeah.
translations. I think she's kind of my number one favorite.
Latimore's great, but you are right. Wilson is probably the most approachable text. I think that was when I first read the Odyssey in school, like before I went to college. I think it was that translation because it is so approachable. That's great that you've had a chance to come back and revisit the classics literally with someone else as they're learning. I think that's the best part about classics is passing it on, teaching someone else. And I want to kind of kick off our conversation too at innovation by asking, because I don't have this opportunity every day. How has your background in classics influenced your leadership approach?
I mean, for the readers, we or the listeners, I sometimes we get these questions a little bit ahead of time. And for me, this was yesterday, and I was like, um, I really have no answer, but it must be huge, right? We're
Yeah.
clearly influenced by everything that we do. That is a kind of a fundamental cornerstone to my management approach. This kind of bring your whole self to work that I've talked about before. And we talk in Two Sigma about a 360-degree view of the problem. And so, knowing that that's my management, approach and the philosophy that we espouse and deeply buy into here, reflecting on what, as a child, 10 years of classical education did to me, really, did make me think deeply last night about, well, what of that do I bring? And I think it's the appreciation that life is not in the moment. We're on this kind of very long spectrum that goes back very, very far, and hopefully goes into the future very, very far as well. And that in order to be really kind of rounded, I think you want to take as much as you can from as many places as you can. And I think that classical education of kind of dabbling, because it really wasn't that long that I did it, but in Latin and in Greek and in ancient civilizations, and I study other ancient civilizations by myself, the ability to kind of look at how they are different, how they compare, and how how you bring that forward into today and where you go with that in the future clearly has influenced my style of leadership and management.
Thank you for sharing that. And for those of you listening, I know this is a tech podcast. You're probably like, where have I dropped into? But if you have not explored anything in classics, I hope this conversation maybe inspires you to learn a little bit about it. It's a really cool field, and there's so much you can apply in humanities every day in tech and working with people in teams. And on that note, I want to dive into solving innovation at scale and the kind of problems that you faced over your time. And you previously shared with me that the problems that you solve, they only get harder and more complex. Can you talk some about how those challenges have evolved over your career?
One of the real privileges that I think you get out of being in the place for 20 plus years is that you get to be a major figure in that arc of time. And so, when I talk about what we've done at Two Sigma, it's really what we've done, me included, from the very beginning. I don't have to rely on stories that people tell me. I was there for everything that happened. And when we began here, if we rewind to 2000, I joined Two Sigma in 2003. Most of what we have today just didn't exist, right? We had actual real computers that we had to wire up. We had a compute farm that was literally a whiteboard. You had to kind of write down when you wanted to use the N computers, where N was a very small number. And so it was a fundamentally different technological world. People really had no understanding about what big data was. For many years, people would just look at me curiously, what is it that you actually do? I had to phone, I started off at Two Sigma running data and phoning around vendors in 2003 and asking them, cajoling them to kind of give me access to their data was really, fun, fascinating, interesting, and fundamentally unlike everything that we've done here. And so, we built technology for the time, and the time was not Google Cloud with amazing analysis tools and vendors that just will drop their data for you. It was, the vendor would ship me a bunch of Spark stations, and we'd have to kind of yank out the hard drive and build tooling to do that. And so, what we've learned or what I've inferred over the years is that innovation and platform building, and we're a platform company here, is really about trying to understand how to bring that kind of hockey curve in for today. Right? That is to say, I have a bunch of problems that I need to solve today, and I want the solution to those problems to be much, much faster, right? That's the kind of the curve in the hockey stick, right? And that's great. And you do that and it works, and things are hard, twice as fast or 5 times as fast or 100 times as fast as they used to be. But people don't always hang around to figure out what happens after. Nothing doubles forever. And so what we found inside Two Sigma is that actually that curve levels off. I like to call it an S curve. So we have some problems, we make solutions for them, and that gives us this incredible lift where we're solving things much, much faster. But eventually that kind of flattens out. And that's because the platforms that you built are built for the problems that you had, when you started the platform. Here's the beauty of a platform is that literally you can use the physical metaphor. Once you've built a platform, you can stand on it and you can see further than you did, and you can see problems that you never had before. And now you've got new problems that are given to you because of the platform that you've built. And so now you're in a new situation. You have new technology, you have new understanding of the problems you're trying to solve, you have new problems that you want to solve. And so you have to start all over again. And so I like to think about innovation as this kind of stacked S curves, where at each point you have the problems of today and you want to lift those and solve those, you know, orders of magnitude faster. But you know that coming around the corner are going to be new problems for tomorrow. And that's really what makes it so exciting, even after 20 years.
I like the visual of climbing up and up and up on the curve and encountering new problems, and along the way, it changes your entire viewpoint of the entire problem space. And when you're working on problems for that long, in a lot of cases, maybe the problem doesn't quite exist yet, or people aren't able to define the problem, and so you're trying to define solutions around it. Over time, you get that common language, you get those common solutions, everyone's on the same page. That S curve flattens out, and you find new problems. And when you go on this journey, S curve to S curve to platform. How do you build a culture that helps attract some of the like the smartest people in the world who are going to come and stand on that platform with you, see all these problems, and find the new heights? Are there ways that you approach that to kind of build that culture?
We talk about what we call an epsilon and an omega approach at Two Sigma, which is to say, in order to solve these problems, you have to have a well-defined but almost unapproachable goal. You have to know, what does the far future look like? Where are you actually trying to go? But if you dither around trying to figure out how to build that future, you'll almost never get till tomorrow, right? You'll get, analysis paralysis, we call it around here.
Yeah.
And so in order to do that, in order to kind of counterbalance that, we have a notion of what we call epsilons. And an epsilon is a kind of the smallest step that you can take that drives you in the direction of the omega that you're seeking. It's not an MVP, right? An MVP is maybe the smallest thing that you can do. You want to make sure that after you finish these epsilons, that you're gathering enough information to understand, is this the right direction to be moving to? Are we getting towards this omega? Maybe should we change the omega because we've learned things during the epsilon that make us rethink how the future is going to look. And so those are the things that we kind of constantly talk about. That's the language that we've built here. I think there's one other thing that I encourage people to take on, and that is to be a little forgiving. We have phenomenal people at Two Sigma. I'm privileged to hire people who are brighter than me every day of the week, and I like that. Genuinely is one of the joys that I get here, is hiring people and thinking, wow, like, I don't know if I would have made it if I came now. These people are just stunning in their approach to everything. But one of the things that happens is, you have a company that's around 20 years, you have millions, maybe tens of millions of lines of code, hundreds of pieces of platform with some maybe questionable architectural decision now. And what I constantly remind people is we should forgive our past selves. Let's assume that when we made those decisions 15 years ago, we made the best decision that we had at the time. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, they look kind of maybe dumb. But back then, when you only had 2 computers or you didn't have enough storage, they might have been the best that we could do. And so we have to look at the past, look at what we've built, and take that, give it a little bit of forgiveness, and understand that, in the future, our future selves might be looking at us with the same way. So we want to pay it forward with a little bit of forgiveness as well. So it's really important to kind of bring that humility and to the process, because we're really trying to get to a better future for the company rather than prove a point to each other.
I like this idea of bringing people in to move along this platform journey, or like the S curve, as we continue to talk about. And your past mistakes, they might look silly, or the decisions that you made, they might not make perfect sense now. But I think that's a great lesson for everybody, to be more forgiving for your past self. You're operating in an environment where you have the best knowledge available to you at the time, and you're making the best decision that you can at the time. And like you mentioned, when you innovate for a long arc of time, you accumulate some baggage, or you accumulate architectural decisions that you have to go back and revisit. But that's the benefit, I think, of that platforming approach, is you get that vantage. You now have all the viewpoint you need to go back to those older decisions and refine them. And along the way, there's a lot of things that can slow you down in innovation. One of them is process. And we talked a bit about process initially. And you really called out like the danger of being beholden to process and how it slows you on this journey. What does good process look like to you?
Yeah, at Two Sigma, we deal in forecasting, right? That's fundamentally what we do here. We try and forecast the markets, and so we work a lot with our data as what we call time series, right? So the
Mm,
data changes through time, and what we've learned is that developing software for time series, for kind of time series aware software, is absolutely critical. And one of the things here that you have to be aware of is that there is another time series going on, and that is the time series of the company. And
yeah,
so all of these things that we're talking about, processes and things like that, they exist both along the arc of time, but also at every point in time. And so one of the things that's important to understand is that you need to continue to evolve and grow and change these processes as fits the company at the time that it's in. And one of the most amazing things about building a company like this with thousands of people in it is that you can actually have multiple kinds of company in the same company at once, right? You can have one portion of the company that is kind of building a good, steady platform and looks like a 1,000-person company. And then you might have teams here and there that are trying to innovate very quickly and look more like startups. And you have to understand that even a single point in time process doesn't work across the whole company. So you have these multiple dimensions. And so the key, what I try and land with folks is let's try first to kind of think deeply and understand why we have a process in the first place. And
mm,
we have a process in the first place fundamentally to what I call lower the cognitive load of the organization. Sometimes people think that's a personal thing and they come to me and they go, Greenwood, this isn't easier for me. And I'm like, no, 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 no. It wasn't for you. This is for the company. It might be more complicated for you, but it's less complicated for the company or less cognitive overhead for the company. And so what we need to do is we need to kind of investigate, does the process that I'm using here that I would immediately apply to this, right? So I have a process for, let's say, code release across the main platform. Do I want to use that same process for this kind of fast team? Now, ordinarily, you might think, yeah, sure, I have a process, let's just apply the process. But actually, these two parts of the organization exist at different points in their life cycle, right? I don't want to take a mature code release process and apply that to, 4 people trying to get great ideas quickly off the ground. And so it's really incumbent upon everyone in the organization to say, okay, what processes do we have? What are good to apply? And what should we change for the circumstances and the time and the part of the organization? And I think that really is key. And if you don't do that, then you really can become beholden to your process. It's sometimes very easy to give up in the face of a process. I'd love to help you, but the process says what fill out these 105. No, we need to kind of constantly, and everyone in the organization, I think, has a responsibility to that process, right? I told folks I was at lunch with the other day, um, I'm relying on the fact that, I'm not coding every day. I wish I was. Maybe the company doesn't wish that, but I wish I was coding every day. But it's important that I don't see what goes on the front lines, right? I'm not there. I'm not at the leaves. I'm
yeah.
not coding. If you see something wrong, you have to say it because I won't see it unless you put your hand up and you say, this emperor may not be wearing any clothes. It's really important to encourage that kind of communication up and down the tree.
Going back to something you said earlier in our talk just now about even in the early days of big data and data culture and kind of building that within orgs, you were you used the word cajoling, getting on the phone and talking with folks about their data practice, the stuff they had on hard drives. And this is before the cloud where it was just easy to just like they give you a URL. You had to go and get some hard drives and then you had to actually like yank the stuff out. So this is really a cool thing to dive into, I think, because you're talking about innovating on a new idea before there was tooling, before there was common language, before there was a real understanding. That sounds very familiar to the environment that we're in right now with things like AI and how people are trying to build business units within their orgs to go really fast. And you see these large traditional companies kind of just like giving free reign to smaller teams to just build, build, build. Don't be slowed down by our process. We need you to find the new process. And I know there's lessons packed in there from your journey in early data. And I'm wondering, how did you build kind of that understanding of a sustainable data practice before big data was even a thing? How did you socialize it?
Yeah, I think that really the journey at Two Sigma in many ways begins and ends with the people that we look for. Look, we're not a big company, even though we have more than 1,000 people. That's not big by comparison with other companies. And so we do have a luxury. We are privileged to really be able to hire phenomenal people. And at Two Sigma, almost everything begins and ends with the people that we have here, right? I just believe fundamentally that if you hire great people and give them interesting ideas and then stand back a little bit, they'll do great things. But you have to also kind of explain to them a little bit about not what great looks like. I think everyone understands what great looks like, but you have to explain a little bit about how you continue to make sure that you're doing great, right? So one of the problems that you have in any company that's successful is you tend to believe in yourself a little bit too much sometimes. And so it's really critical. And we are a systematic company. And so we have tied ourselves to this scientific process, but really it's one of query and curiosity and asking those questions and then being really intentional about it. I have this phrase that I use at Two Sigma. I call it turtles all the way down, right? The idea being that you can come and give me a number, but I'll really only buy that number from you if I have a belief that all the way down to the bottom, you understand where that number's coming from. And what will happen is if there aren't turtles all the way down, if you're drifting on nothing, everything falls apart. And so I really ask my people, there are many different management techniques. One of them was 5 whys and 2 so whats, right? So the idea being that you ask why, and sometimes I sound like a little child, but the idea is what how you show me that you've really thought this problem through and you're intentional about it, and then pedal to the metal, let's go and get it done. But if you're just doing this because it's fun, or big companies sometimes will just say, just let them loose and see what happens. The chances of you getting something good are like maybe monkeys typing Shakespeare, right? So you have to kind of
Yeah.
really think hard about what is that process that you use to encourage innovation and it being intentional and it really being able to explain how you get from A to Z.
It really, what it boils down to is being aligned on impact. Sounds like ultimately you need to understand what you're doing. Turtles all the way down is a great way to describe it. The why, really making sure that you can fully understand their train of thought and why they are justifying their decisions. And then, like you said, then once you will have that alignment again on the impact, then you can go really fast. And I'm wondering too about how you're applying this nowadays. How does Two Sigma think about keeping up with the latest and greatest in this impact driven way, like specifically around like AI and LLM technology?
Yeah. So again, happily, we've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
We've been doing machine learning. We've been doing AI for literally decades. We have built a whole practice around how to understand data specifically as it changes over time. And so all of that really is helped by providing a great foundation when we come to this new and incredibly exciting kind of Gen AI. Uh, you know, Maybe flowering is the wrong word. It's more like mushrooms after a summer rain than flowers.
Yes.
They're it's a little bit, havoc ridden. And so, that has definitely, given us, let's say, comfort. And we think we understand the questions that we should be asking. But really deploying AI effectively is first and foremost understanding how you think you can use it. And that is non-trivial, right?
Yeah.
We say, oh, we have to use it, right? That's true. But understanding how we have to use it is really key. And it's not about how we have to use it now. It's how, where do we want to be in 3 to 5 years, right? There's no question about it. Gen AI is going to, be like a sea change across engineering. And so you want to think about, how do you benefit from that inflection? What do you do with your people? How do you figure out? And I have again, like I keep saying this, I have great people. I have great people. I have people who graduated from the most amazing places in the world, and they say to me, "I'm nervous about the future." And
Hmm.
my role as leadership and management and innovation is to try and explain to them what a future looks like, where their role and their value will be even more than it is today. And I understand that it can be concerning, but the future is incredibly bright if you figure out where you're going. And so, first and foremost, on top of that foundation that we've built, is thinking about, how do we use Gen AI to automate? And we've been doing automation again for 20 years. And I love automation, right? Because if I can automate something away, that means I can spend more of my time, that I used to do that thing that may have been fun, but it was repetitive, to actually think about things more interesting. And I'm still, a humanist, right? I still just believe that we have this little spark that no machine is going to come and take away for any time soon. And so I just fundamentally believe that freeing up time for humans to be creative and innovative has got to be better for all of us than worrying about whether they're going to type 100 lines of code tomorrow or some Gen AI will do it for them.
So it sounds like a lot of the ways y'all are harnessing AI now is around things like automation to free up cognitive load, human process to work on a deeper process.
There are many ways that we use AI today, and we kind of tend to clump them together. And so one of the first steps about trying to understand how we're going to use this Gen AI in the future is to try and understand all the ways that we're even using it today, right? So, for
Mhm.
example, I'm sure, like most of your listeners, I have some subscription to some kind of Gen AI something or other, and I use that in what I would call an advisory role, right? I ask
Mhm.
it questions, it gives me answers, and that's it. That's an advisory role, and that's a great role for Gen AI. And it lies, half the time. People like to say hallucinates. I don't pull punches. It lies. It just plain out lies. Then there are, what I would call a more oracle role. Well, I guess I'm getting classical again, right? Which is to say, something that will accept or reject the outcome of an advisory role, right? So, hey, can you write this piece of code for me? Now I've got a piece of code. I want to know, is it true? Like, does this do what I want? So I can pass that off to an oracle and say, here's the code. Here's the thing I wanted it to do. Can you just check that it does the thing it wants? And just give me an answer, and I'll accept the answer. That's kind of more of an oracle type role.
Yeah.
And then we have another role that we use AI for around here, which I would call an operational role. Can you create a code base, check it out a Git, make a branch, these kind of things where it would be a bunch of, pretty standard commands that I would do that, together make a small piece of workflow, tiny piece of workflow. And so, when I was programming once upon a time, we used to have people who looked after the build, right? They call them build masters. And so that's a classic example of where you might, use an operational, you use AI for an operational role. And then there is the kind of, maybe the top or the bottom, depending on which way we're drawing this ladder, the agentic role. And that is someone who kind of coordinates all of these. So you might have, and we've seen that. I think there was an article I read the other day. I think it was some large company, I won't name, who tried to create a company of agents, right? So they had business analysts and
Oh, I
so
read this. Yeah,
yeah.
that was very interesting.
You could think about an agentic role where you would have a bunch of advisory roles. So these would be writing code, and a bunch of oracles that would say whether the code would be correct, and maybe operational role who's checking things in and out of Git, and then an agent role whose role it is to kind of give tasks out to these advisors, right? Maybe features, right? So, and now what does the human do in this case? Well, the human is left to do what I call the most interesting thing, which is actually describe what they want. At the end of the day, very few people I know who write software to write software. They
Yeah.
write software to express an idea, to create something. And we have better ways as human beings than writing in, C or Python or even Perl.
when you talk with like the smart people who work at Two Sigma and they come to you and express like, oh, I'm nervous about the future, or like things are changing so quickly. Is this part of like the mentality that within Two Sigma of how people are preparing for the future? Is that like we need to understand how to interact with this technology, and that might mean having very clear roles? Like, how are you helping them be future ready in that regard?
It's a great question. I think that, um, you know, this notion of roles is, look, my formal training is as a mathematician. So I like crisp definitions that leave no room for doubt. And what we found over the years is that some of the ambiguities that we have amongst human beings is because people don't understand their role. And
Yeah.
there's a classic tool, a RACI diagram, where you write who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, who's informed. Most problems that go wrong are because people are in a conversation and they don't understand which role they're taking in the conversation.
Yeah.
And so they believe they're being consulted or informed when in fact they're responsible. That's a bad one, right? Or they want to be responsible, but actually you're just informing them. Then they get upset. And so, if we see this in humans, there's no reason to believe that we wouldn't see this in computers as well. That is to say, if we can help define what roles are and kind of keep them tight, then we might be able to get better juice. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we've covered that there are turtles all the way down, right? We may be missing a few. That's the where we live in AI right now is terribly exciting. There's always new things going on, and so there may be more learnings to have, and we might look back and say, "Wow, those were dumb decisions we made." But at each point, you want to try and be as intentional and as crisp as you can. And when it comes to people, I don't know. I think it's complicated. On the one
Yeah.
hand, I think it's incumbent upon every leader and every manager to understand that today is different than even just a few years ago, right? There's a lot of concern, and that's rightfully put. Even if we believe, because we have the pattern match to 3,000 years of history, that things will get better.
Hmm.
Um, Nevertheless, it's important on the one hand. On the other hand, my job here, our job as leaders and managers is not to kind of, wrap cotton wool around every developer, right? We have to give them the tools that they can then work through those concerns themselves. That's my job as a manager, is to be able to give you enough information that you can work through that concern that you have. And if I don't do that, then you're going to have more concerns, right? That's reasonable. And if I say don't be concerned, then I'm actually depriving you of the ability to work through that. And so it's really important and it's a little bit of a balancing job here, right? It's really important that we find the right path to be able to give people the tools they need to work through the problems rather than keep them from thinking about those problems.
And has that problem itself ever changed through all of these hype cycles? Is that always the core problem to solve? Or is there maybe different nuances that you've noticed having been in a company across so many hype cycles in tech?
I think this does because I think unlike other hype cycles, it's not obvious to people on the ground that the outcome of this is rapid growth in their opportunities. In every other hype cycle, if you kind of, I'm just kind of going through them in my head right now, um, you could see massive opportunities ahead. Yeah, internet, wow, like websites, unbelievable,
Whoa.
like huge opportunities. Here, it's not at all obvious that there are huge opportunities, and so that is fundamentally different about this cycle. I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, my daughter was graduating at high school, and we were talking about what she wants to do. And like me, she's kind of split brain, history and math, something like that. And I said, you should just do computer science because there is no, like, this is your time. This is your time.
Absolutely.
for computer science. And that was literally 6 months, 5 or 6 months before ChatGPT. And after that, so like I think it came out in November, right? Something like that. So
Yeah.
the cycle hadn't finished yet. She's still applying for colleges. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe philosophy is a good major because actually asking questions might be the right thing that you need now. And so people still don't understand, but there is this concern that opportunities might be narrowed, and that is really different than previous hype cycles.
Yeah, that's definitely a difficult one to navigate. And even within your own organization, over those hype cycles, you've grown this engineering organization. You've moved through S curve to platform, and you've found those new heights, those new advantages that give you new opportunities and new challenges. And along the way, you've had to kind of take the temperature on your own engineering org, what they're doing, how they're adapting to your process, the one you've been explaining to us so clearly in our conversation. And it's clear that you lead with a lot of empathy with how you approach problems with your people. And I'm wondering, how do you what are the underrated signals you think of like a healthy, adaptable engineering organization?
That is a phenomenal question. Perhaps if someone had asked me that 15 years ago, we would be in a different place. Um, you know, I think this kind of goes back to my comments right at the beginning about being a full-rounded organization.
Yeah.
One of the key lessons that I talked to my initial manager, my first-time managers about is understanding that everyone brings their whole self to work. And there are many, many dimensions about what that means, right? I mean, they have issues at home, they're going to come to work. Like whether you see them or not, they're going to be there. And so, yes, you have to lead with empathy. You have to understand that you're seeing this person for a small amount of their life, and they have a whole life out there on the one hand. On the other hand, the more, and this is maybe going to sound slightly Machiavellian, but the more of them you can bring into the company, the longer you're going to keep them, the more excited they're going to be, the better it's going to be for the company. And so think about how you kind of engage, more of the people who work with and for you. One of the drawbacks of having phenomenal people here, no, it's not drawback, that's the wrong word. One of the potential concerns is that they don't have to come to work here. These people can literally get jobs anywhere. And so it's
Yeah.
very different. So you have to make sure that it's exciting enough that they want to come back to work every single day. And we've done that at Two Sigma by doing kind of notoriously geeky things, right? We talked about being the best place for nice geeks, and one of the things we did very early on was have a hacker lab. So we have a hacker lab, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's full of old equipment, where we do things from the obvious soldering to kind of knitting and crocheting and baking. And we
Wow.
call it a gym for the mind, right? The idea being, it's clear, I think, to every manager in every company that if you have a gym, it's going to be better for your employees. Why? Because they get to exercise, and physical exercise is good, and pumps the blood. The same thing is true for your mind, and the more you can encourage people to kind of use that whole brain that they have, the more chances that more of that brain will be used to further the aims of the company, which is ultimately what we all want.
What a great note to end that on. I think that's such a good takeaway for everybody. And for me, this was like one of those episodes that makes you want to study both the old and the new. We covered so much great territory here that just is like evergreen, that you can really is relevant forever, which is why Matt and I have such an obsession with things like classics. And, Matt, thank you for showing us that lasting innovation doesn't come from chasing things, but it comes from cultivating depth and challenge and curiosity in both yourself and your team. And before we wrap up here, where can our audience go to learn more about Two Sigma and the work that you're doing there?
Certainly begin at the website, www.twosigma.com. And we have on the website, we try and put blog posts that we make, and kind of a window into what Two Sigma looks like inside.
I
That's
think
a great.
people are going to want to peer in that window because we covered some really cool stuff, and people are going to want to go check it out. So we're going to be sure to put that in our show notes. And listeners, if you're curious about what Matt's building, please go check it out. I've checked out extensively their website. They have some really cool videos actually that do a good job of kind of like visualizing how this data is impacting our world and the kind of things that Two Sigma is doing with it. Very cool. And so we're going to drop that in the show notes. And thank you, listeners, for joining us this far. If you made it all the way to the end, then you clearly liked this conversation, and you should probably go pick up a copy of the Odyssey. Be sure to subscribe and share the episode, and check out our Substack for leadership insights, because this is only half the story. We're going to be covering more of it there. And that's it for this week's Dev Interrupted. See you next time.
Thanks very much.